840 Newstalk Sauga 960 Raw. Mike Richards. As I was mentioning beforehand, when we talked to Geoff Kirbyson last, we were talking about the hotline. So that's Hall, Hedberg, and Nielsen. It was a fabulous book, just a great read, and a lot of people just loved it. We love talking to Geoff about that book. But now comes another book with one of the great titles for me that I've ever seen, Broken Ribs and Popcorn. This is the story of the Jets and that era of that, the WHA merging with the NHL. And this morning, there'll be a lot of people who would have to look back on exactly what we're talking about. The WHA, for certain age groups, they give you that look. They don't quite understand when you talk about the Jets. They just assume you're talking about a team that has always been in the NHL, which of course we know isn't the case. So books like this really bring a lot to what happened with the Jets, including an era of real excellence. But it's sort of like when you're sandwiched, and when teams, for instance, Major League Baseball, when they complain that, we were in the same division as the Yankees and the Bo Sox. Well, the Jets kind of had that going on too, and this book talks about it. And we go to our good friend Geoff Kirbyson. Geoff, how you doing this morning, buddy?
Excellent, thank you. Good to be here.
We should also tell people, as an author, you are wearing a shirt this morning.
And I even did up the buttons.
Yeah, hey, you can do it all. They've always said that about you. What a great book, and Broken Ribs and Popcorn. So why don't we just explain what the book's about? And I'm just really curious about the title because it is a great one.
Well, this is sort of a sequel to The Hotline. Certainly it is chronologically. And so it talks about how the Jets became the best team in the NHL's most offensive era to not win, because obviously the Oilers win all those cups in the 80s, the Flames won, the Islanders won, the Canadians won, and the Jets were always in the conversation, but they're in the Spike division, so they were in the toughest division with the Flames and the Oilers, and I think it's like 8 seasons out of the decade that one of the finalists came out of that division. And so the title comes from the Broken Ribs one. Probably isn't a big surprise to people. Those were Dale Hawerchuk's ribs in 1985 when Jamie McCowan became public enemy number 1 forever.
Yes.
In Winnipeg for cross-checking Hawerchuk in the opening round and breaking his ribs. And he tried to come back. They had him wearing kind of flak jackets, and it just wouldn't have worked. It's not like he could have hidden where he was injured. And you can bet if one of the Oilers had a chance to take a shot at his ribs, that would have been the first thing they would have done. And the second one refers to 1990 when the Jets were up 3-1 in the playoffs against the Oilers again. And this is actually when they're up 3-2, and they fell behind 3-0 in Game 6. A game in which Dale Hawerchuk had been pulled off the power play, by the way. And they came back and scored 3 goals in a row. The ice was tilted. All the pressure, all the momentum was on the Jets side, and everyone's just waiting for the 4th goal. And in the third period, they thought, well, as soon as we get this last goal here, finally we'll beat the Oilers. And there was a close play at the Oilers blue line. And one fan expressed his displeasure, I'm assuming it's a him, by throwing a ball upward on the ice. And this is in the era before there were ice scraping teams. And so there's no one ready. They had to go find a janitor and kind of walk him out on the ice. He had to get a dustpan, and he scraped up every last kernel. And while they're doing that, the Oilers coaches called the team over there. They got to calm everybody down. The air came out of the building. And a few minutes later, Yari Curry got the puck on a 2-on-1 and ripped one over Bob Essence's blocker. And then that was effectively the end of that series, because they went back to Edmonton for Game 7, and it wasn't a close one.
Yeah. Oh, I still remember that too. Man, that's anyway, okay. Let's continue here. When we're looking at Tommy McVee, this guy was basically the guy that brought the Jets into the NHL as a head coach and so forth. What went through your decision of getting him to do your forward? Because I know you talked to a lot of different players throughout the eras, but I just wanted to get a quick thought on Tom McVee, because a lot of people forget about Tommy McVee.
Well, Tom McVee came to Winnipeg in the last year of the WHA. John Ferguson hired him, and he led the team to the last WHA championship, and of course brought them into the NHL. And he was the reason I use him is because he's the funniest guy I've met in hockey.
Yeah. And
he would he told me that in the summer between the WHA win and the NHL start, he'd be going to softball games and banquets, and people would be saying, "Oh, it's going to be great, the NHL." He said, "Well, they took all of our players, you know." "Yeah, we're going to be great. You know, we're not going to be very good." And then he was trying to give everybody a reality check, and everyone was like, "Woo, this is going to keep on going forever." And they said, "We don't care that the prices are going up in our tickets." Well, after about 5 games, they cared. And Tommy was there for the draft when they would be filling up their roster with immortals like Hilliard Graves, when they'd lost guys like Kent Nilsson and Terry Ruskowski. And Tommy was there for most of the 30-game winless streak in 80-81. And the poor guy, he was just every way that the Jets could have found to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, or a tie from the jaws of victory, they did it. There were 2 games when opponents scored twice with their goalie pulled. Yeah. So it's hard enough to score 1 goal. It's very hard to score 2 goals. It's almost impossible to give that up twice in the space of a few weeks.
You know, I would say, Geoff, you know, it's funny when you say that, for people listening here this morning. Generally, in most sports that I can think of, if your team, and I don't care whether it's overseas in soccer or if it's NBA, Major League Baseball, the thought of losing 3, 4, or 5 games in a row is enough to sort of twist you quite a bit. I couldn't imagine when you get into week number or whatever it is, and you're sitting there at 21, 22, 23, the city must be on the proverbial ledge. Like I would think that there's very few people, aside from people in that city, who can tell you what that feels like. I don't know what that would feel like.
There were a lot of Jets fans who would go to games wearing paper bags over their heads. And once it got into the 20s, McVee got let go early in the 20s. People started thinking, well, I guess we might as well, like the record was 26 set by the Kansas City Scouts. And everyone thought, well, might as well set the record. Oh, no. And so finally we did set it, and it was broken. If there was ever a time to break that record, in the 3rd week in December, the Jets played the Colorado Rockies and the Detroit Red Wings back-to-back, and they were the 2nd and 3rd worst teams in the league, respectively. And the Jets had once again got up to a 2-goal lead on the Rockies, and then gave it up in very short order. And then a miracle of miracles, there was in a tie game late in the 3rd period, they got a power play, and Willie Lindstrom took a pass from Anders Steen and ripped it home to give the Jets the lead with about a minute to go. So nobody was getting too excited, because they'd seen this before, where they'd have a lead, they'd give it up in the dying seconds. But that lead held up, and that was the early Christmas present for everybody. And Dave Christian, who had just less than a year ago had been on the Miracle on Ice team, said that winning that game was comparable in relief to beating the Soviets at the 1980 Olympics.
Nice quote by Christian, number 13.
Yeah.
We're not running out of time yet, but I got to talk Dale Hawerchuk. Because you guys know how I feel about him. Geoff knows how the province of Manitoba feels about this guy, and unfortunately, we lost the legend just just a couple short weeks ago. You had a chance to talk to him with this book. Can you tell us a little bit of some of those conversations?
Yeah, I chatted with him. It's probably about 2 years ago. We had a great conversation on the phone, and I had interviewed him in person a couple of times. And when I told him that what I was doing here to kind of document the story of his team, he gave me tons of time, and we talked about all kinds of stuff. And like I mentioned, the getting pulled off the power play in 1990, and so that was also a season when Bob Murdoch had said they were going to have rotating captains. So Howard had been the captain for 5 years. Now we're going to have rotating captains. They called them Velcro captains because Trace Heisinger had to keep on going and ripping off the A's in the C's and moving them around. And so Howard took what was an obvious slight and just said, well, I'm going to keep on. All I can control is what I do on the ice. So you got pulled off the power play. Okay, well, I'm going to go and give you the best I can, not on the power play. And after the first period, Murdoch came to him and said, hey, let's get the old power play going again. And Howard said, well, yeah, okay. But I missed the meetings for the last couple of days. But he was very candid about a lot of stuff. He was candid about wanting to come to Winnipeg and wasn't worried about coming to a team that had won 9 games the previous year. He was saying it's a new slate. We're not those guys. He was very candid about how he left Winnipeg and how he didn't want to leave. But when after John Ferguson got fired and Mike Smith took over, Smith was not a fan of Howardchuk's. And early on, in fact, in the first season, Howardchuk and Scott Arniel were talking to Smith, who was then a scout. And Smith told him if it had been up to him, he would have chosen Bobby Carpenter with the first overall pick in 1981. And that he didn't think the team was going to do very well that year. And Howardchuk thought, well, why do we have a guy like this around here? And then in 1988, he takes over for Ferguson. And Dale told me that he went to owner Barry Schenkro and said, listen, I'll give you 1 year here, but I have trouble with this guy. I'm not sure I can play for him. And after a year, after the playoffs that year, 99, he went to him, to Schenkro and said, I want to be traded. And Schenkro said, well, what do you mean you want to be traded? You're Mr. Winnipeg Jet. And he said, yeah. I gave it a shot here. I can't work for this guy. And that was it. And Schenkro wasn't about to let the players run the team, so he had to defer to Mike Smith. And a short while later, Howardchuk was traded to Buffalo for Phil Housley and a package that included a draft pick that ended up being Keith Tkachuk.
That's right.
It's amazing what ego does. It's amazing how you can take a look at team and realize that there are guys who get in there can actually, like a crowbar. It's funny after watching Last Dance and how that all came together with a GM that, what was that little germ? What was that Oompa Loompa guy? I can't think of the name right now. Yeah. And sit there and go, why would you tolerate? There's parts of it that I did understand of his significance. And then just the actual ruination of a franchise. Now, I know we're running tight on time, but I always like talking comparables so people sort of understand. When you look at what this team and how good this team was, where they came from and where they got to with the other massive powers of the time, it's just how history falls in sport. So they would be compared to what? The Phil Mickelson of hockey in some way, where Phil unfortunately had to be during the Tiger era. Who knows how many majors he would have won if he didn't have that?
Yeah.
Is there a comparable?
Buffalo Bills, maybe, I guess. Well, they never got to the big game.
Yeah.
The unfortunate part is, if you look back on those Oilers teams, the 84-85 Oilers team was voted the best team of all time. And you could say lots of people have said to me that the 84-85 Jets were the best Jets team of all time. That's when they had 6 guys who scored 30 goals. And they had depth like they had never had before. They finished 4th overall in the league. And unfortunately, that's when Howard broke his ribs. So no matter how much depth you have, and you take the number 1 player out of your lineup, off your power play, and you're going up against the best team of all time, well, those are low odds. So unfortunately, as good as the Jets were, they were in that division. And you had Gretzky and Curry and most importantly Grant Fuhr. And I guess the other thing I should say there is that a lot of people have said to me, a lot of players, that they were they didn't have Fierce. They were maybe a goalie short. They had Pokey and the Bandit. They had Brian Hayward. Later on, they had they had Bob Essenza. But Grant Fuhrer didn't give up a goal late in the third period in a close game. And Wayne Gretzky said that he's the best goalie of all time. So the Jets had really good goalies. We had a Hall of Fame goalie, and that was the difference.
Two questions from me because we got about 30 seconds, Geoff. How many people did you actually interview for this project?
About 125.
Amazing. And second question, was there a worse trade than Dave Babbage for Ray Neufeld in the 80s? Worst trade?
No. And unfortunately,
correct.
For Ray Neufeld, he gets asked about that trade 35 years later,
Oh, no.
every single day. And he told me, he said, I didn't make the trade. Ferguson made the trade. If I was Emile Francis, the GM in Hartford, I would have made that trade. So what disappointed Ray, and Ray was very candid about this, he said, John Ferguson never went to the microphone and said, hey, everybody, I made the trade. Deal with me. Get off Ray's back. And so, so for 35 years, dealing with something that wasn't your fault, and he does it with class every day.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, right? You tend to forget that they're just human beings now. They're not gods, and that they move on with their own lives. And they're in a small town, and someone bumps into them at the Piggly Wiggly and go, "Man, did you suck? Can't believe we got you." Hey, what? Hey, you know what I mean? Like, how do you respond to that? That is the life of an athlete that sometimes we kind of forget a little bit. Geoff, thanks so much for joining us. Always a pleasure to talk with you. The book looks
McNally Robinson too. McNally Robinson on the website. Pre-order it now. I did mine yesterday. I can't wait. Geoff, you're the best. Thank you for this. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me again, guys. That was great.
Geoff Kirbyson joining us once again. The book Broken Ribs and Popcorn, a fascinating look at a team that was spectacular in a lot of ways, and yet in an era where there were godlike teams and probably didn't get maybe the recognition. This is a show, obviously, that talks a lot about the Jets, strangely enough, in the GTA.
Yeah, weird, eh?
And all that happens. And of course, the late, isn't that weird that I have to say the late, great Dale Hawerchuk? It still doesn't sound right and feels quite actually bad to say it, but certainly the greatness was there on and off the ice for Dale. It is